Harassing Trump's cabinet equals hood politics.
Vote you out! Vote you out!
Turtle head.
Vote you out! Vote you out! Vote you out! Vote you out! Vote you out!
What are you doing to get the babies back?
Yeah, we know where you live too,
them.
Mitch. We know where you live.
Vote you out!
Yeah! We know where you live, Mitch.
Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
We did good.
Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and Mitch McConnell seems to be the latest victim of the Trump administration hating pitchfork mobs, this time in Louisville, Kentucky, by a bunch of super woke white allies of, I don't know, queer and trans people of color, Islamic people, and of course, immigrants. Also, of course, this is all prompted by the allegation that the Trump administration is responsible for basically putting babies in concentration camps, or some completely hyperbolic nonsense like that that isn't even true, and was a media allegation that there's actually been retractions around from places like Time magazine. A woman from NPR named Maria Hinojosa even admitted on MSNBC that the exact same types of things were happening during the Obama administration, and even far back as 20 years ago, media was reporting on such things with immigrant children like Elian Gonzalez.
I've been covering this for decades, but when you talk about a consistent dehumanization of people, that's how you get to this point. Because it's just, I mean, when I was reporting inside the detention centers in 2011, okay, during the Obama administration, the way that people spoke inside were like, oh, who cares if they get food with maggots? Oh, who cares if they're getting beaten up? They're just a bunch of illegals, right?
I'll leave the link to that full footage in this video's description, and yet still, of course, even though it's plainly evident to anybody with half a brain that none of this was a Trump invention, much of our nation has already been programmed to hate Trump anyway, and a few lies go a long way, which is why the media keeps telling these lies. Now, I'm no fan of Mitch McConnell. I think I recall him saying stuff that I don't like, but of course I don't remember because I don't even remember what exactly his position in our government is. I am not a Republican, and I'll admit that he does look a bit like a turtle. Regardless, the fact that people are going around doing stuff like this doesn't make me angry, even though it is messed up, but honestly, the only reason for that is because it's almost kind of comical. You see, it doesn't take a political science genius like Amanda Waller from the Suicide Squad to figure out that this can easily be traced back to the furthest thing from a political science genius that we have in Washington today, the fantastically hilarious grand embarrassment of the Democratic Party, Maxine Waters. I've said this on streams numerous times, but I'll say it in plain English here just to make myself perfectly clear. When people object to affirmative action, their biggest fear is people like Maxine Waters getting a shot at being anything besides a surly middle school vice principal that every kid is afraid of or something. It's almost as if meritocracy was a C, affirmative action and affirmative action-like sentiments was Moses, and Moses parted the sea so that Maxine Waters could strut down a catwalk at the bottom of it right into Congress, where she gleefully shows the world at every given opportunity just how bad it can get if one's identity is their main marketing strategy. Not only has she called for the public harassment of rival politicians without apology, not only did she repeat that numerous times, but when she started catching heat for it and was inevitably sent a few death threats, her response was to tell a crowd,
I know that there are those who are talking about censoring me, talking about kicking me out of Congress, talking about shooting me, talking about hanging me. All I have to say is this. If you shoot me, you better shoot straight. There's nothing like a wounded animal.
This obviously begs two questions. First, so wait, you're an animal? Did you contact the NAACP before making that statement? And then also, Does she think that there's going to be some sort of duel or something? Does she not understand that we've come a very long way since the days of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr? Obviously, Maxine Waters is a total crazy person by anybody's standards, but we have to remember that as surprising as her actions might seem to most people, she didn't come from thin air. No, Maxine Waters is the quintessential embodiment of a certain strain of leftist activist behavior, which revolves around the demonization of what they call respectability politics, or really, being respectable in any way. I'm not really sure where this notion originated from and whether it happened organically or not. There's a small possibility that the Democrats actually realized that the red tidal wave was coming long before they would admit it, and they had been planning on brewing Trump derangement syndrome for years in America's citizens, hoping to propel America into a frenzy so that he would maybe be a one-term president or something. Still, I have no hard or soft evidence for any great conspiracy of that sort, but one thing I can definitely tell you about is the way that this unapologetic and loud hostility commonly relates to the Black community, and maybe even particularly Black women, being that I grew up going to school in a Black neighborhood and have lived in both Brooklyn and Oakland. Quote-unquote respectability politics is a negative term used by intersectional feminists, which, remember, started out as code word for Black female feminists. To do my best to steelman the argument a bit, at first, the notion was based around the idea that minority populations should not always be demanded to assimilate into mainstream culture to be respected by mainstream culture. I imagine that when the concept was first introduced, they focused a bit more on things like hairstyles and other more innocuous cultural traits that tend to be looked down upon by mainstream culture. However, it quickly morphed into the idea that when people have a reason to be upset, it is unfair to demand that they be completely cordial with the people that they are upset with, aka the oppressors. There is a truth to the honest feeling of getting annoyed when people won't validate your understandable anger, but intersectionals took that small nugget of truth and ran with it. It went from, sometimes Black women get treated like garbage and we are expected to be nice about it to the people who treated us that way, which is unfair. And it became, Black women deserve to be as rude and downright vicious as we want, and if you object to that, you are committing misogynoir against us, because respectability politics came from the white male patriarchy. I am not making this up. Do a Google search for respectability politics, and you'll literally get dozens of articles that say that type of thing, claiming back in 2014 on Everyday Feminism that respectability politics are outdated and a bad idea, and that presumably acting like Maxine Waters will win elections or something. I obviously think it's not a great strategy, but I think that maybe there's a deeper psychological mechanism that I have observed throughout my life when dealing with maybe Black people in particular, which is simply that a lot of times certain Black people overestimate the power they wield, assuming that all white people are afraid of them, and thus they can basically get away with whatever they want by intimidating white people. Yeah, it's unfortunate to bring this up in relation to skin color, but I've seen this recently when a Black friend of mine posted a status update on Facebook, where she shared an article about hate crimes allegedly being on the rise, and said, "What should we do?" A friend of hers responded saying, "The same thing that we've done for decades, physically intimidate white racists so that they know not to try us," or something like that. As if poking sleeping bears is a good idea. Truthfully, from my experience, this mentality comes almost exclusively from Black Americans who grew up in predominantly Black neighborhoods, and not from Black people who actually have a whole lot of experience with real white racists or working class whites of any type. The logic behind this pattern of behavior is fairly simple. Being that their neighborhood is black and white people are a minority there, and thus often get robbed and beaten up when they make the mistake of walking through it, the black people who lived there assumed that white people are weak cowards that they can just endlessly bully. And apparently, this even applies to politics, at least if you ask Maxine Waters. But of course, this isn't actually true in many instances, and I can assure you that the black people I know who grew up in mostly white areas do not have that same attitude. They know better than anybody that you cannot endlessly intimidate or pick fights with white people and expect to unanimously win or unanimously scare the white people, because occasionally this happens.
Yeah, well, calm down. I'm out here. I'm from New York, and I'm out here by myself.
Son, don't you choose the one you want?
I don't know. It all just seems like a big mess to me, and I have been saying for years that people need to cut it out because it can get a lot worse before it will get better. But people keep seeming dead set on making it worse, which is not only going to lead to them potentially getting their asses whooped by guys like Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys, but also it obviously won't win any elections to chant that they're going to be voted out of office instead of just voting. I'm going to borrow from my friend Feral Cat, who has a great video posted that I linked in my GigTow playlist, where he talks a bit about the very people who demonize quote-unquote respectability politics and act like they have every right to be as freaky, obnoxious, and generally non-respectable as possible. He mentions that these same types of people still expect to be treated with respect and are eager to ride on the coattails of all the respectable leaders who made the social change that allowed them to be treated decently. These same people basically piss all over Martin Luther King's grave in the current year, acting like he was a sellout or something, and they belittle people who like his words about judging people by the content of their character ahead of their skin color, claiming basically that those people don't know what real racism really is, as if Martin Luther King was basically a respectability politics practitioner that did nothing worthwhile. And yet, of course, Martin Luther King was taught to us in grade school as a great man, and his words were what inspired generations of young white people to look at black people and not treat them like crap, despite the fact that people like Maxine Waters do her best to try to ruin it for everybody by acting a goddamn fool. That's all I have to say for this video. Leave me a comment and maybe share this if you liked it better than my crappy improv stuff over the past month, and stay tuned.